You're watching LMCC.
We interrupt this program to bring you an official tornado warning from the U.S. Weather Bureau. Broadcast of this official tornado warning will follow in just 30 seconds here on WCCO Radio.
The Twin City Weather Bureau has received the report of a tornado threatening to move into the metropolitan Twin Cities area. We have activated the Civil Defense Take Cover Warning Siren.
I live on 101, just south of Chanhassen.
And you said you sighted a second tornado?
Yes, we can hear it and we can see it.
Where do you think you'd place it right now?
I would place it on the fringe areas of Excelsior, just a bit west of Excelsior.
All right.
Coming directly a little north of Excelsior.
I hope the people in Excelsior who may be listening now have taken cover, and that would mean in their basement.
We know a tornado has swept through Chanhassen, Minnesota, and 25 miles west of Minneapolis and St. Paul, flattening several houses, causing considerable damage. The Carver County Sheriff's Office said it has no reports of any injuries in Chanhassen as yet.
Now, was there heavy rains along with it?
No, we had heavy hail here. They're even larger than golf balls.
Now, let me indicate here with our latest report from the Twin Cities Weather Bureau why we're getting so many reports from all over. 3 apparent tornado cells have shown in just the past few minutes on Twin Cities radar about 20 to 30 miles due west of the Twin Cities, and 2 other cells are apparent on radar about 50 to 20 miles north of the Twin Cities airport, which would give you 5 possible funnels bracketing the Minneapolis and suburban area. That's something that's just been handed me. Twin Cities radar indicates a hook echo now, indicating the strong possibility of a tornado over Lake Minnetonka, just south of Wayzata, moving towards Wayzata. We've already had reports from people in those areas who actually watched the funnel and talked to us live on the air. So the immediate Twin City area, from my standpoint, should be under cover at the moment, or at least ready to take cover at the moment. There is a tornado alert now over all of western and northern suburbs of the Twin Cities. I know that it sounds confusing to you to hear reports from the Wayzata area, from the Lake Minnetonka area, from Midway and Ramsey County, all reporting tornado funnels, but we've now determined that there's more than one, and perhaps as many as 5. The actual entire Minnetonka area itself should remain ready to take cover on a moment's notice. Here's a bulletin just in from the Twin Cities Weather Bureau radar showing an intense hook echo, a definite tornado between Cologne and Carver, moving toward Victoria.
I'm in Wayzata, Charlie. I'm out on County Road 15, where earlier they experienced tidal waves, and I've just come through the tornado itself. I was in the Browns Bay Boatworks inspecting the damage when we heard your alert that another one was located south of Wayzata. We were a little bit west of Wayzata, and first there was a silence, and then the noise, the winds began to pick up quite a bit, and then we started hearing shattering glass as the plate glass windows in the front of the boatworks went out.
Now, I've been watching a map as we talk here, and it sounds to me like we're speaking of 2 funnels now. One that just left the Minnetonka area headed straight north, perhaps in the vicinity of Hamel at the moment, and another one that you gentlemen don't know about, which may be coming your way again. Uh-oh, the lights are blinking. I hope we're all right. Must be. Repeating that we know of damage in the Minnetonka area and also in the Coon Rapids.
We have one sighted right now, Dick.
Area.
Hello?
Yes, we see one now. It's out over the Fridley area, and it's dipping up and down.
I couldn't see it. It just got dark, and it hit just real suddenly. I was looking out. It got funny and dark, and it just hit. There is awnings and windows broken, and I've got 3 big evergreens on my yard here, and they're all uprooted. And even our lawn fence is picked up and broken. It hit just real fast. It started blowing up, but we ran for the base, and it hit in about a second, and it hit.
Here's the first tornado that went through Carver and Hennepin counties, touched down around Cologne. I believe that's Lake Waconia, and went up that way. And I got to step in here just a second. Yeah, so this is the one that went up through the west edge of Lake Minnetonka. Is that Halstead's Bay? Yeah, there's Excelsior, and then eventually went through Navarre. This tornado killed 3 people and injured 175. and it was on the ground from 6:08 to 6:40. Touchdown east of Cologne and moved northeast, dissipated northeast of Minnetonka and Orono. So that's the first one. You can see damage here in Navarre from this tornado. So 200-mile-an-hour winds can do that. Then the second tornado was that Chanhassen-Minnetonka Deephaven tornado over on the east side of Lake Minnetonka. Touchdown at 6:27, was on the ground until 6:43. It was also an F4, winds of probably 200 miles an hour or more. It's on the ground for 6.9 miles, so almost 7. So it touched down in Chanhassen, went up through the east side of Christmas Lake, right through Deephaven, and then on the North Home area shore, and then up toward Wayzata Bay. There were no fatalities or serious injuries with this tornado. This is according to the Twin Cities National Weather Service summary, which is pretty remarkable. Here's what was called the Minnetonka Boat Works on Carson Bay. The boats were blown into the water. The building was completely destroyed. Here's a home in Cottagewood on Bay Street. You can see a boat up there on the roof. Looks like maybe a sunfish or something, a little sailboat. And here's tornado number 3, New Auburn, Lester Prairie. Touchdown at 6:34 until 7:01. It was an F3 tornado. It was on the ground for 15.5 miles. Nobody was injured or killed, thankfully, with that one. Touchdown 5 miles east of New Auburn, traveled northeast to near Glencoe, and dissipated west of Lester Prairie. So this was the westernmost of the tornadoes that evening. Here's a photo that I believe is in that Lester Prairie area. You can see some of the damage there. Number 4 was an F2 that touched down at 6:43 near Green Isle, Hamburg, and Waconia. And it was on the ground until 7:04. It was on the ground for 11 miles. One person was killed, 175 injured. And this thing, as you can see, started near Green Isle, made its way to Norwood, Young America, and Carver County, and then further north. Dissipated 2 miles southwest of Waconia. And there's, again, just the kind of damage this can do. This was an F2. I believe this was from the same tornado. And you can see that kind of damage of a farmstead also. So pretty remarkable what tornadoes can do. Now we talk about Fridley, which really, if you think about it, was the worst area in this outbreak. It was hit by 2 separate tornadoes. The first one touched down at 7:06, was on the ground till 7:21. It was an F4, path length of 6.8 miles, killed 3 people and injured 175. Touchdown in southwestern Fridley and traveled northeast through Fridley and dissipated northeast of Laddie Lake in Blaine. So that was from 7:06 to 7:21. Then that tornado lifted. You can see the damage here, a photo by Robert Lattery, just complete destruction. Cars tossed into homes, just bedlam. This was the Fridley Terrace Trailer Court near Highway 65 and 73rd Avenue Northeast. I can't help but believe some of the fatalities must have come from this area. Then there was a second tornado that touched down at 8:14. They thought things were all clear in Fridley, but they weren't. 8:14 to 9:02, another F4. This one was on the ground for 17 miles. Killed 6 people and injured 158. It started near Golden Valley and traveled across North Minneapolis into Fridley through Mounds View, finally dissipated west of Centerville up around Lino Lakes. This was the Northern Ordnance Plant. Look, it's shredded. I mean, it was literally just like shredded by the wind and the debris. Apparently, it was hit twice. This is the area near where the 2 tornado paths crossed at different times. Here's another photo of damage in Fridley. And here's a list, a more thorough list of all of the tornadoes from that day. Again, biggest outbreak in the Twin Cities history. We've had larger outbreaks during a day in Minnesota, but never anything this concentrated and never anything in a major urban area. Now let's talk about what they saw that day and how warnings were communicated. So WSR 57 was the 10 centimeter wavelength radar that was installed in the early 60s. They had one out at the airport. And it was a strong radar, and you could see, obviously, precipitation echoes. Radar was invented in World War II because you can see things moving in the air. Well, you can also see hydrometeors, raindrops, hail, those kind of things. So the National Weather Service had this radar, and this is what the image looked like. And I know this just looks like a big smudge and a couple of blobs, but what we're looking at here is this is near the center of the Twin Cities. So this is kind of ground clutter, as we would call it. The radar will hit trees and buildings and give a return. But if you start to look at here, you can see what's called a supercell thunderstorm with an appendage trailing off it. Look here, there's another one. Look up there, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. Now they had overlays on these with geography on it so they could see where these things were. But that evening, 24 separate hook echoes were noted on radar. Not every hook echo has a tornado, but that night, most of them did. Here's a loop of this for a couple of hours in the evening. You can just watch these cells moving slowly northeast. In this kind of an environment in the atmosphere, things are moving slowly. It's kind of what we call a warm frontal zone. And moist air is feeding in underneath from the south into these storms. And it's kind of a delicate situation. I mean, tornadoes are so violent, you think the atmosphere has to be just raging. And maybe it was above, but you need just the right amount of lift, and you need just the right amount of circulation, and you need no big northwest winds like destroying the storms from the backside. It's very delicate. And this environment was perfect for tornadoes for about, 3 hours that evening. Here's another still shot of the radar, but you can see the hooks here. One, there's a developing one, there's a pretty well-developed one. So this is what they were looking at on radar when the National Weather Service was getting out warnings that evening. This is Moore, Oklahoma, which is one of the most intense tornado ever observed. This is in the 90s. But something we know today, just look at the geometry of the storms. Okay, there's the storm and there's the hook, the appendage, the same as what we saw. Our tornado outbreak was an Oklahoma-style tornado outbreak. We don't get those up here very often at all. But I just wanted to show you how similar that geometry is to the strongest tornado ever observed. They clocked winds over 300 miles an hour with mobile Doppler units in this storm. And what you can see there is called a debris ball. That's stuff getting lifted up into the atmosphere, and the radar sees it. This is May 3rd, 1999. I might get the year wrong, in Moore, Oklahoma. So what about the weather from that day, the meteorology? Well, just to orient you, here's Minnesota, right? Here's a low pressure system in South Dakota. Here's a warm front dragging right through the Twin Cities. Here's another one south. And then the cold front, or what we call an occlusion, behind. Very slow moving low pressure system. South winds ahead of the system, pumping in moisture, pumping in warmer air. Looking at dew points, we got 62, 71 degrees was the temperature, 62 the dew point, and dew points in the 60s. So it wasn't, tropical air. There was enough moisture to work with, but it's along these warm fronts in this kind of a setup where you get what's called shear and spin in the atmosphere. So this is a perfect setup in the low levels for tornadoes. Now the upper level, the upper atmosphere, this is a 500 millibar chart, which is about 18,000 feet above the ground level. You can see a dip here, so here's this what we would call a low pressure trough back in the Rockies. And then in here, see how these lines tighten up? That's an area of stronger winds. It's what we call a jet streak. So in that area, the jet stream is blowing more quickly. And what that does when you put it over and superimpose it over that warm front at the surface, it's going so fast that it creates like a vacuum effect, and it just sucks the air up and it creates lift. And that lift is what produced those thunderstorms, and that low level spin and shear along that warm front is what produced those tornadoes. And that whole package came together for about 3 hours right over the Twin Cities. Now, a lot of lives were saved that night. There were a lot of heroes. The U.S. Weather Bureau, as it was called in the Twin Cities, and we call it the National Weather Service now, it's part of NOAA, they saved a ton of lives. Jim Stone, Dean Nestle, and Neil Lampe issuing warnings on these storms. I mean, nothing like this had happened before to this degree. The warnings were timely. It was also the first use of civil defense sirens for severe weather in Minnesota. People were clear that this was going to be so bad that what we used to call air raid or civil defense sirens back then, they said, blow them, let's blow the sirens. So they did, and then that became a common thing now. We use civil defense sirens for tornado warnings. WCCO radio was key to saving so many lives that day. Their innovative continuous coverage where they just saw this thing happening, and Charlie Boone and Dick Chapman and others got on the air and just started talking about the tornadoes, and they were fielding phone calls from people in the tornado areas, and this was an ongoing continuous coverage situation where people were calling in and saying what they were seeing, and they were relaying warnings. It was a remarkable event, and it saved a lot of lives that evening. Really, between the Weather Service and WCCO radio, it was kind of the advent of modern severe weather forecasting and warning. This is a shot of, I think, Dick Chapman and Charlie and folks working at CCO radio that day. And this is still, that 1965 tornado outbreak is listed by the climate folks in the Minnesota Climatologist's Office as one of the top weather events in Minnesota history. In with the Dust Bowl, the Armistice Day blizzard, the Halloween blizzard, which is another key point in my career that I worked. Should we go down that road? No, I'm kidding. And the Minnesota River flooding, Red River flooding, and then the Mississippi River flooding, which, by the way, was the same year as the tornadoes, right? And just about a month earlier. Quite a year in 1965. And so Met Council and some folks, Kenny Blumenfeld at the Minnesota Climate Working Group, drew a new map of what if this same outbreak happened again. And you can see the increase in population density in some of the areas, especially where these tornadoes went through. So if something like that does happen again, it won't be the same, but it could rhyme. It could be a completely different situation in terms of damage and casualties, which is why I literally have nightmares sometimes waking up that I missed a tornado on the air. That's my world, okay? Someday I'll retire and maybe they'll go away. But, it was a remarkable event, and I know a lot of you were there that day. And I know some of you may remember this book, The Minnetonka Tornado Story and Pictures. Have you ever seen that? Yeah. It's fantastic. It's just got pictures of so many homes and so many stories in that. And that's what I've got for tonight. I can't wait to hear from all of you in the audience, and we'll answer some questions too. But I just want to thank you for inviting me out here and all of you for coming out and sharing this evening. Thank you so much.
Okay, so it's time for you to share some memories if you would like to. Okay, who wants to start?
My family and I were driving into Southdale to do some shopping. We didn't have radio or TV on at that time because we were at dinner time. I was driving, I approached the area just before Pine Hill Road. There were semis turned over, evergreens running across Highway 7. And a man stopped us and he said a tornado just went through and is turning around and heading toward Lake Minnetonka. So we just missed it going in. We turned around, headed back to Mound, and it was following us through Navarre. I got to the intersection of what is now Congress, and the hail started, and it sounded like hammers pounding on the roof of our car. we made it home. We lived in 3 Points at that time, and we made it home safely.
Well, mine's a little more.
Could you ask people to stand up?
I was 10 years old.
Would you mind identifying?
Paul Huttner. I was in Cottagewood. And
Please say your name and maybe where you lived or something.
Paul Huttner, I take the fifth. But I was 10 years old in Cottagewood, much close to where Tim River was. And I was watching Johnny Quest. Johnny Quest, which was a cartoon show. My brother saw the tornado coming from the southwest and told me my grandmother was over for her birthday party. My uncle's house was 2 houses away, and they were having a birthday party for my uncle's mother, another grandmother. And the tornado came through, and I missed seeing it. But downstairs, they say it sounds like a train, right? And it did sound like a train. In fact, on the other side of Cottagewood, where my grandmother lived, she went out, and she was only about 5 houses from where it really hit badly in Cottagewood. She walked out to look for the train. I was outside. Unfortunately, was not hit. She was not listening to WCCO that night. The next day, I know you see news stories about, well, what happens after, the day after there's a big event like this. And they always show kids, they have to fly on the cheek or tears coming down. I don't know about you, Tim. When my friends and I got together the next day and saw the destruction, only one word immediately came to our heads for a 10-year-old. Cool. This is the coolest thing we've ever seen. And James Bond's Goldfinger had come out the year before, and there were shingles everywhere. And we would take the shingles and yell, "Odd job." Anyone remember Odd Job? And throw them at each other. Death, there was no death, but there was lots of destruction, and it was lots of fun for a 10-year-old.
So real quickly, I want to tag on with Paul real quick, in case if you'll hand Paul the mic. Tell us why tornadoes sound like trains.
I don't know, but I'll say this.
You ever seen that James Bond movie with Odd Job in it?
Yeah.
That's why, no. It's called the Doppler effect. So when sound travels through the air, it travels at the speed of sound. But when winds start to mess with that, it makes it sound more like a freight train. Or when a freight train goes by, it's compressing sound. So you hear the and then you hear that, because literally the speed of the wind is messing with the sound waves.
Okay, as far as destruction, 4 houses away was the Russell Wing house. They went in the basement, came up, and there was a slab of concrete. 2 houses away was my uncle's house, and my dad's little 9.5 boat was taken up and went through the front living room window of my uncle's house. He lost his roof. Across from his house, an entire garage was lifted, and I believe was found in Norfolk.
Hi, I'm Barb Warner, and I was married to Tom Warner, who has passed away. Anyway, we lived in Cottagewood, right across the street from the Cottagewood grocery. We were painting our house that day, my husband and I, and we had our windows open because we were painting the trim. We were going to put our house on the market. Anyway, as we were painting, and my mom and dad were there taking care of our 4 children. When this happened, Tom said, there's a storm coming. We've got to get to the basement. Get the kids, we'll get to the basement, which we did. When we came up, Tom said, I've got to go and check out house to house to see if people are okay. So he started out, then he went back to the house again and put on his tennis shoes so he could get through all the rubble and stuff better. He went from house to house, and when he got down farther, I don't remember the name of the people. I think it may have been Provincia. Anyway, this lady had been her husband was an invalid on the porch, and she was over him like this, and the glass came and literally scalped her. She came outside and said to Tom, "Oh, I've got such migraine headache, it's just terrible." Well, the blood was gushing out. Anyway, so he carried her out, and as far as I know, she was the only one from the area that died. But he got blood poisoning and from stepping on a rusty nail, so he ended up in the hospital the next day. But anyway, before he went to the hospital, he had to go over to Minnetonka Beach to check out to see if a sailboat was okay. I mean, that was...
Hi, my name is Becky. It was Anthony at the time, and we lost our house in the tornado. It came across Highway 7, just east of Christmas Lake. We were between Cottagewood and Highway 7, and it was on whatever night it was. But anyway, my dad and brother were out picking up the hailstones that he talked about earlier to stick them in our freezer so we could show people how big these hailstones were. And my dad looked up and he saw the tornado coming and hollered for us to get in the basement. We went to the stairs that was supposed to be the southwest corner, I think they told you to go to at that time. But we had a split entry. So we ran to the stairs, the closet that was under the split entry. We didn't have time to go to the west corner. Anyway, the next thing I remember is I was laying on the basement floor and everything was gone. We lost everything that day. We'd only been in the house since October. We just built the house and lost it, so we lost everything that day.
Can I just say one thing too you reminded me of? Back in the day, they used to say go to the southwest corner of the basement because they thought that's the direction the tornado was coming from and the debris would kind of be blown past you. And remember they used to say open the windows an inch? Because they thought the pressure drop in the tornado made the houses explode. Severe storms research, and the engineers got involved, structural engineers, and determined that really none of that's true. The tornado damage is actually caused by the wind itself, and often by the debris that's lofted in the wind. And so maybe a 2x4 penetrates a house and then the wind gets in there and then does the rest of the damage. So interesting.
Another comment on that, our neighbors who lived right next door went to the southwest corner. They all were injured. There was 6 of us at home, none of us got hurt, but all 4 of them were hurt severely. They were in the southwest corner.
Okay, and just one last thing, because now I'm hearing of more than one injury, and there was listed as none. The severe storm reporting was clearly not as thorough as it has become, but as far as injuries.
Okay, my name is Michael Ritchie. I grew up on Island, lived there until I was 12 years old. My family moved in Minneapolis a couple of years before the tornado hit. However, my father, Richard Ritchie, was still on the Island Park Fire Department. And he and my uncle Bill Helms got called and asked to respond to the whole situation. And we're out here for a couple of days afterwards. 3 of our neighbors died, Mr. and Mrs. Paulson, and I can't remember Julia's last name. Is Debbie Tharlson here by any chance? Okay, Julia, who as I understand was an elderly lady, actually died in the Tharlson's living room as the tornado was going by. And there's what used to be called Brighton Common Lane is now Julia Road on Island Park. So my memory is basically what my father and my uncle did as far as responding goes, and the fact that the neighbors were killed. One of the things that my parents found out later was that the Paulsons, the deed to their house was found blowing around in a yard in Wayzata the next day. One of the houses that was destroyed was that house of the Wickners, my extra pair of grandparents. Let me explain. My cousin Arlen Anderson is in the back. Her grandparents were the Wickners. And that's exactly where the tornado hit. And so we're very familiar with all of that whole area. And one of the things I tried to do before this meeting, and when I heard the meeting was coming up, is seeing a lot of pictures of the damage. So I've been going through the family archives with the help of my cousin Arlen, who's in the back row here, to take pictures of some of the houses before they got knocked down. So we have a couple nice shots of the Wickner's house, for instance, the Wickner cottage. And in the background of some of them, you can see the Paulson's house, which was next to the Wickner. So we've got a lot of that, and it's been an interesting thing for me, and I appreciate being invited to come.
Hi, my name is Mary Seifert-Shaw, and I was visited by the tornado that came across Christmas Lake and took off the 3rd floor of our house. So 3 things to say about that. 1, we lived on the hill, and there were live fish in our lawn. 2, our Thunderbird was out in front of the house, and a few days, and it was there after the tornado in the same place. I was driving it back and forth to work. As it turned out, my father had a patient. He said, Doc, I saw your car up in the air. They figured it had to have been 90 feet in the air because from where his vantage point was and where the car was. But that tornado, although it was full of shingles and things, they came and put it right back down in the same spot. And we were riding it. And the 3rd thing I have to say is that Homer Martinson, who was the pro at Boys at a Country Club, he said, I knew it hit your folks home because your canceled checks fell on the Boys at a Country Club.
Was anyone here driving east on 7 on that afternoon? Nobody? Well, I'd been commissioned to go down to 7 High to pick up my little brother at the Ben Franklin, and I was heading east on 7 and listening to KDWB, and all of a sudden I heard a noise I'd never heard before, and it was the sirens going off. I'd never heard them before, so I pulled right into my girlfriend's house. Her dad owned the Ben Franklin in Excelsior, the Gainers, and her mama was just standing in the kitchen frying hamburgers, and Pam and I went down to the basement. Nothing happened, so I got up and left. And I saw debris go across 7, and I saw 18-wheeler that I think was up at Sunrise Cemetery. He maybe pulled over for safety, and it landed on the other side of the highway. So I went flying into 7 High like Chicken Little, the sky's falling. And when I left and came back, that trucker was still there. His 18-wheeler was flipped over. So got home. My dad had turned out he had followed one of the western tornadoes home on either Highway 7 or Highway 5. And he came home. His eyes were like this, and I said, "Forget about it. Promise tomorrow. I got to get this dress finished." And I didn't know. Steve Berkey also saw that truck on Highway 7, but I don't see Steve here tonight. So anyway, that's my story. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Gunners, and my dad worked for the street department in Excelsior on that night, and he got a call to go out and clean storm drains. And I was 13 at the time, and so he said, "Come on, we're going to go clean storm drains." And he took my brother and I remember standing on the hill above the Commons and looking to the east. And we could see the tornado that went through Christmas Lake. And then we watched the one that went across through Excelsior Bay and hit Cottagewood. And the thing that I remember was how dark it was. And that green was really green. But it was just so, for that early in the evening, it was just so dark. And Excelsior, as I remember it, didn't get pounded, but the next day, I went to Sunday school at Mount Calvary, and they got our class, and I remember Phil Buck. I graduated in '69 from Minnetonka. I remember Phil Buck and I, because we had some experience with, my dad sold firewood and stuff, and so I actually knew how to run a chainsaw. So we went out over by the Highway 7 area. You remember that rest area? There's that monument up there. And just everything was just gone over there. And we had a bunch of us from Mount Calvary that went over there. and the next day. And the thing that I kind of am amazed at is everybody came out, you know, with all the disaster and all the loss. There were so many people out. A day later, lending hand to everybody else. It was pretty cool, actually. And so as much destruction as it was, the entire community came together, and I'm kind of amazed at how fast the recovery actually took place. But it was a hell of a night, to say the least.
I'm Betsy Atwood Massey, and I'm a Cottagewood kid. And I know we've got other Cottagewood kids here. My brother Addie and I went through the tornado together. I was in the 2nd grade, Eddie was in preschool. I remember that day, it was a Thursday, and there was a teacher workshop. I think about once a month, Minnetonka had a teacher workshop. And so we had a half day. We were all out playing in the neighborhood, skateboarding down from Thompson's Point. And we came home when the dinner bells all rang. And my sister, our older sister Peggy, she was trying to get her Girl Scout badge. So she was making dinner that night, and I think it was boiled hot dogs. And my mom was listening to WCCO radio. Our father was not home yet from work. And all of a sudden, my mom just, you know, like said, kids, get down to the basement, you gotta go down there, you gotta go down. And our house was on Lakeview Avenue, on the lake. And we actually had a bomb shelter down there, like a lot of people did, but my mother is very claustrophobic. So she did not want to go in that bomb shelter. So we went behind a bar, and all of a sudden she realized with all these glasses, you know, the way the direction the tornado was coming, I mean, we could all be killed from the glasses. So she laid on top of us, and we just laid there and we're like, what's she doing? And we just, and all of a sudden we heard the train come through. It was like a bomb went off. And we finally got up. In fact, Eddie was in shock, or we were suffocating him underneath the pile. And we got up, and it was a walk out to the lake. And we couldn't see out any of the windows because all the wood from the boathouses along the shore was up against the house. And we finally walked upstairs, and the doors were closed to the lower level, and we opened them. And it was similar to The Wizard of Oz, the movie, when it opened to all the color from the black and white, but it was almost the opposite. Because we went up, then there was just so much destruction, and our house was, you know, blown apart, and it was really scary. It was a really scary night for all of us.
Yeah. I'm Chris Thompson, also from Cottagewood neighborhood. And I just want to say a couple of things that were unique, I think, that we found out about that night. I asked Paul also, why does the sky look so green and yellow as it did? But anyways, one of the things we noticed the next day was, and one of the local policemen pointed this out, was a piece of straw that has been driven into a telephone pole. And it was unbelievable. And just, that's how much force of the wind was able to drive the straw into the telephone pole. And like Betsy said, our mom had us in the basement, spread-eagled under her arms, listening to the roar of the train and all the breaking of the glass. We had a big old 3-story house, and every single window and the china cabinet, everything was just broken to pieces. And one last thing, and that is the sound of chainsaws went on for weeks, and I still can remember that that sound. So,
thank you.
Hey, Chris, I just jump in quick. I thought, thank you for that question. And by the way, it is so good to see old friends who I haven't seen for so long tonight. So thank you all for coming out. The green tint to the sky is primarily because of hail. Hail refracts the light and breaks it up into like colors of the prism. and the green tends to bounce around and make its way through because the other colors get scattered out. So that's why when you get hail like that and clouds that are 50 to 60,000 feet tall, that's why it gets so dark and why you can get funky things happening with the light spectrum.
So I have a story. My cousin Michael spoke up here earlier, and he talked about the Paulsons and my grandparents who lived next door. My grandparents had a place in Edina, and they had a cottage out on the easternmost shore of Cooks Bay, where our cottage currently is, because it missed the tornado by about 5 houses. But the Paulsons asked my grandparents if they wanted to come wait out the storm in their basement. And my grandparents said, no, thank you, we're going to go home now. You know? And they went home to Edina, and the Paulsons got killed in the tornado. And so, yeah, that was close. And I want to say I'm the same age as you, so this is also one of my kind of core memories, is walking down the commons to go show my grandma the fish that I had caught that day. And I mean, I was a little tyke, and just the memory of walking up the steps and there being no house there anymore. And let's see, I had something else I wanted to share. Oh, Julia. Michael talked about Julia. She died in the storm, but she died after the storm. She had a heart attack when she came up from the basement after waiting out the storm at Garlison's house on the island. And she died of a heart attack apparently from the shock of seeing the damage. So, but I'm glad that this core memory turned into your wonderful career, because I'm an admirer.
Paul, you didn't mention Ferndale. Tonight, Ferndale was pretty heavily damaged with all those fancy houses. That didn't get mentioned. I'm wondering how significant that really is. Do you know?
I haven't seen a lot of pictures from there, but the tail end of that Deephaven tornado that did go up through North Home and then apparently lifted near or after Ferndale, so it's quite conceivable that was the one that did it.
My name is Dottie, and at the time of the storm, we lived in 3 points, my husband and I, and 2 little girls. I was working at the National Tea in Mound, which now I think is in Buchanan. There's a little strip mall. Anyhow, the manager and I were working that night, and the storm hit. We could see cars, boards, ducks, everything flying by. And we were really scared. And I was wondering if I could see my 2 little girls and my husband again. And there were so many times that we spent in the basement that summer. Also, Island Park was just a disaster. And I really applaud the fire people who helped out with that. Thank you.
John Woodburn, I am a Cottagewood kid. And Eddie, we sailed together. Who remembers Smack's Drive-In? Yeah. There you go. The Woodburn family was at Smack's Drive-In May 6th at the time of the tornado. I was 5. Our house is the first house in Cottagewood. And I just remember we got there. Dad had come home from work from Honeywell. And as I recall, I may have been a little bit tough kid that day.
To the mic?
Yeah, and mom wanted to go out for dinner, so we went out to Smack's, and they had a inside area. And the thing I remember is a woman screamed out tornado. And I look up, I didn't know what was going on. What's a tornado, Mom? I got shoved underneath the table. I mean, Smack's, there's no place to go, right? I didn't realize until today really how close we were to the path of the tornado. And it was a wet, muddy spring. It was just muddy underneath there. And I guess my memory is I was hungry, and I kept asking Mom when I was going to get my hamburger.
Hey, John, where was Smack's? Remind me, where was?
Vine Hill Road. It's and I was
Okay. So not Snuffy's, but up on Vine Hill, not 101. Okay.
There's a Valvoline instant change oil change there now. And yeah, there's a Burger King there later. Yeah, so. Oh, there you go. Yeah. So, but I just want to reiterate that as a kid, it was a blast. We played Tornado all summer long. It was more fun. Grandma Ann and Grandpa Fred were an elderly couple. They're kind of neighborhood grandparents who lived right next door to us. Their story was they were in the basement, and all of a sudden they saw daylight. Their foundation lifted up, maybe 6 inches or so. I don't know how much, but they literally could see out. To our benefit as kids, they just took that house down in this big sand pit. So we got to play in the sand pit. Yeah, it was good. But I do want to recall the community coming together. There's a lot of engineers. The Hulsick's Don Hulsick. There's a he was in the plumbing business, and his daughter.
Dee Dee also.
Well, that's Dee Dee. So no, this was
Ann.
Yeah, Ann Hulsick, and then Joey Hulsick, and
Charlie.
Yeah, and Fran Hulsick. That and apparently in his business, when they sold his house, were the plumbing plans for about half of the houses in Cottagewood. So he, the community really kind of came together afterwards. So yeah, it was good. I mean, it wasn't good. All right, I'll share another family lore story. Apparently, so this devastation looks like a bomb's gone off. My dad's being interviewed. So we've got a 900 square foot house. I'm sleeping in the cinder block basement next to the washer and dryer. So they've got plans to build, right? They're working on it. We're a growing family and so forth. They want to have another kid. And apparently, the radio interviewer asked him, it's just this devastation, right? Dad's going, well, it's not so bad. I mean, the family wasn't hurt, right? And in his later years, as I talked to him, he got to build a house. And he lived till he was 94 just a couple years ago. And as I talked to him towards the end of his life, big thing was building this house. So there's positives that came out of it.
We did not play tornado ever after that storm. My family, we grew up on Dunwoody Avenue, and Mom and I were going to mother-daughter banquet, and the sky got weird. My dad was a car fanatic. Mom said if we get hail in this car, we are in such deep doo-doo. So we turned around, went back, stopped at the Dairy Queen, and the guy goes, "Get the heck out of here." So we go back home to Dunwoody Avenue. My dad and 4 brothers were all in the basement, and minutes later this train roared over and just demolished our home. And we were not able to get out until the next day, until the National Guard could get us out. So we don't play tornado.
Where was your home?
On Dunwoody Avenue that leads to Casco Point, Spring Park Bay, and it landed on our house. Yeah.
Michael Mason, I live in Spring Park. In the 90s, there was a straight line wind that hit Spring Park and the bar. And could you just explain it did the same kind of damage that a tornado would. Could you explain the difference between straight line and the damage that a tornado does? Sure.
Yeah, I always tell people when I'm in severe weather coverage, because people tend to not give severe thunderstorm warnings as much respect as tornado warnings, that it doesn't matter what kind of storm did the damage to your house, it's all wind. So tornadoes have that circulation, and it goes up into the parent thunderstorm, and the winds are rotating around that. And so when they hit a home, for example, they could come from 2 different directions. It could hit from the left side, and then it passes and hit again from the right side. And so that can have kind of a dual effect on weakening the home one way and then hitting it the other way. Severe thunderstorms are simply what we call straight line winds. A thunderstorm will drop out a gust front. When the hail and the rain falls, the air is cooling, and that hail has mass and the rain, and so it creates this tremendous gush of wind. think of it as a hose. Like if you turn your hose on and you point it down at the ground, it'll hit the ground and then it kind of spreads out like that. That's called a downburst. And that wind, those winds can be as strong as tornadoes. They can be over 100 miles an hour. So if you get that kind of a wind, it can do similar damage to a tornado.
Hey, my name is Mr. Whitner. I should have followed Paul in endeavor for the Weather Bureau. The tornado 65 was my second tornado I went into. First one in 1958 in Fargo. So one in 65 we went over Lakeview Golf Course. And I do remember finding a piece of hail bigger than a cannonball. And I remember that because I used my mom's good kitchen knife to cut it open. A lot about it.
Hi, I'm John Chandler, and we grew up on just the shoreline out of Smithtown Bay, so we were looking towards Boy Scout Island and then Spring Park over there. And I don't remember the exact sequence, but the wind came, then the rain, then the hail, and the green clouds. And the green clouds had those puffs underneath them. Maybe you can explain that. And then everything went silent, just completely quiet. And then we looked out across the lake, and then there was just this huge black, wide tornado. And it didn't move very fast. It just kind of slowly went along that shoreline and just sucked up everything. Yeah, and we just watched it go across. And then the next day, being little kids, we got the fishing boat out and went over and looked. And in contrast to all these other damage scenes, where there's all this debris, it was completely vacuumed clean. There were no trees, no houses, no nothing. Just bare ground and a few little stubble sitting there. And so I don't know if that means that the wind was stronger over there or what, but it was a giant vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, the puffy clouds underneath are called mammatus clouds. And if you think of the circulation in a thunderstorm, it's like a big convection current. It goes up in the middle and then comes down on the outsides. And so sometimes in those severe storms when we get severe updrafts and downdrafts, the bottom of the cloud, the winds can kind of punch through on the edges lower as they're kind of dissipating, but you see those mammatus clouds form on the bottom. That's usually a sign of a severe thunderstorm.
I'm Jackie Regan, and at the time I was living in Minneapolis, but I have a different kind of story, and I'm sorry for any of you who have destruction or problems within the family. Mine's a little different because that night my husband-to-be and I were at Jacob's Jewelry on Nicollet Mall designing engagement and wedding rings. And we were kind of aware, or at least I was, that it got kind of dark outside and people were coming in. They were really wet, but they weren't coming all the way into the jewelry store, just into the doorway. But we didn't pay any attention. We had other things on our mind. We got done with that, went outside, it was sunny, and we picked up some food and took it to my husband-to-be's apartment. We were eating, and a phone call came, a friend of my husband's, or my husband-to-be. And Tom said, well, what are you going to do tomorrow, John? Well, John says, it's Friday, go to work. No, you're not. My husband worked at Payco. The roof was blown off the building while we were looking at the rings. Payco.
Where was it?
Well, Payco was just off Golden Valley Road. It would be west of Highway 100.
All right, I'll share one quick one while Casey's taking the mic back.
You're gonna have to meet me halfway.
So I was young and I have these very random scattered memories of the tornado. I remember we didn't have school that day, so we were playing in the afternoon. And I remember it was beautiful sun, and then all of a sudden huge hail balls that, like everybody, we saved to put them in the freezer. And then I remember that it was pea green. Never seen that green before except in my dad's homemade pea soup. Seriously, it was the very same green. It was like, wow, Dad. And this immense silence, and then this huge train sound, My brother, who was quite a bit older than me, wanted to be a weatherman, as he called it. And he had gotten a barometric pressure thing for Christmas. I don't know what it was, but it hung on the wall in our dining room. He just adored it. He was so excited all day. He kept going up and reading the dials and saying, oh, this is going to be big. This is going to be big. And I adored my brother, so I was like, oh, I'm excited. It's going to be big. I wonder what it is. And then we lived on St. Elmo's Bay, so if any of you know that side of the lake, we lived on the Five Corner, Manor Road side. So anyways, Mike tore out of the house, and being a fan of my brother Mike, I tore out of the house after him, and we stood outside during the whole tornado. We didn't have a basement in our house, so I don't know what everybody else did. But we stood at the end of the driveway, and I watched the funnel come over St. Elmo's Bay, and it sucked all the water up. Speaking about that water and fish thing, it sucked all the water up, and I remember saying to my brother, it's raining up, it's raining up, because I could see all the water being sucked up. I don't remember anything about fish. And we thankfully had no damage, and nobody near us did, but we weren't very far from Amesbury, and that part of the neighborhood up in Manor Park where there was a lot more damage done. So, you know, as a little kid, I had these random bits and pieces of memories, and I kind of can't even remember which order they came in, necessarily. But I actually saw a funnel. Today I would say it's kind of cool to have seen it, but I appreciate that. There was a lot of levity and laughter tonight, too, because it's a sad topic, too. That gentleman has a mic, and then I'll bring it to you guys.
Yeah, my name is Rod Scanfield, and I had the pleasure of being a senior at Minnetonka High School in 1965.
Can you talk a little more into the mic?
Yeah, I was a senior at Minnetonka High School in 1965. And we lived in Excelsior in Gideon's Bay. We had a nice 7-mile view from Excelsior right down to Wayzata. And I remember sitting on the front steps, and we watched 2 tornadoes at once go across the lake. Both the one that went from the bar went across the lake towards Wayzata, and then the other was over on the other side by Excelsior. And we watched them both. My sister was with me. I think she's here tonight. And within an hour then of seeing those tornadoes, a friend of mine got in a car and drove as far as we could over towards Cottagewood, because we had a number of friends who lived in Cottagewood, the Bowers, the Brookses, and some other people. And we spent a couple hours just helping people get out their front doors. I mean, what was left of them, because there were trees everywhere. The closest we could get to Cottagewood was basically by the Deephaven City Hall and tennis courts down. But it took us probably an hour or 2 hours just to get to the tip of Cottagewood Point. It was from the station. So anyway, it made for a really unusual senior year.
And to follow up Joni's comment, so I grew up right there. Okay, Joni, you grew up right next to me, right there.
We were very close. We didn't know each other.
So I was 7 years old. And so, you know, it's hailing, it's a big storm. I remember it was very quiet before all the action hit. And when it happened, we had a stage wagon. The stage wagon's in the garage, and we put down the tailgate. We're all sitting outside on the stage wagon tailgate, watching the hail come down. Running out and grabbing some hailstones and coming down. And anyways, so my oldest brother goes around the side of the garage and goes, hey, Dad, come here, look at this. This is really cool. You should see this cloud. So my dad went over there and immediately grabbed all those kids into the house. And of course, my mother was washing the floor. So she said, you can't come through here. Anyway, so we made it to the basement. And that was the tornado. So we saw that same tornado that you were watching as it came by, and then it went in and just trashed.
I saw it first.
But I also remember that, you know, I was in kindergarten at the time, and the next time we went to school, it was almost like half the class wasn't there. And many of them never returned. And it was because they had to move away. Their homes were gone, you know, so they went somewhere else. And it was May, so of course there was only 1 month left. But the other thing I also remember was everybody helping out. And so I remember we made sandwiches and we took them over to Christmas Lake, and everything was barricaded. So you pull up there and you open up the tailgate, and then they would come out and have sandwiches and things like that. But it was, the community really did come together for it, but yeah, it was quite good.
Are we good? We thank you so much for being here tonight.